So welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to lecture number 1 of economics in this lecture series called Prelims Powerplay 2026. Now, if you have been following this lecture series, we have completed polity. Okay, 10 lectures of polity are done and now we are going to begin with economics. Now, the thing is that yes, we are done with polity, but we are done with polity in phase 1. We will come back to polity portion in phase 2 and also in phase 3. So this doesn't mean that everything related to polity is covered. No, just phase 1. Okay, and today we are going to start with economics lecture number 1. Now, before starting with economics, I just want to address two things. These are very important for those who are revising with us through this lecture series called Prelims Powerplay. Okay, fact number 1 is that if you haven't given the polity test, if you haven't revised polity from the notes provided by us, and if you haven't given the test, give the test now and then watch this lecture. This is very important. Closure is very important. Whatever we have discussed in the past 10 days, well, you have to revise it properly and give the test and then come to economics. Then start something new when you have completed the previous thing. And fact number 2, which is more important. Now that we are starting with economics, you see, economics is a little bit of a technical subject, right? So I am expecting a lot of doubts from your side. Okay, do ask your doubts. You have been enrolled in these WhatsApp groups. Okay, use them wisely. Ask your doubts. There are going to be problems. There are going to be issues. Ask them. We are here to help you out. And for all of you who are just watching this lecture, are not revising the notes, not asking the doubts, and are not giving the test, well, register in this Prelims Powerplay lecture series. The registration details are given in the comment section below. Once you register, then after every lecture, you have to memorize it from the notes, ask your doubts, and give the test. So register for this lecture series on our app or on our website. Clear? Okay. So let's begin today's lecture, and today's topic of discussion would be FRBM Act, Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act. Now, FRBM Act is important, okay, because recently CAG came out with a report and basically it highlighted certain discrepancies in government's accounting, okay. But for that, you need to understand what is FRBM Act. And for that, you need to understand what is fiscal policy, what is fiscal expansion, what is fiscal consolidation. So in today's lecture, we are going to cover all these things: fiscal deficit, fiscal policy, fiscal expansion, fiscal consolidation, and FRBM Act. Okay, so pay close attention and remember the thing that I told you just at the beginning of this lecture. Ask your doubts if you have any. Okay, don't be shy. All right, okay, let's begin with FRBM Act. So economics lecture 1, FRBM Act 2003. Now FRBM, the full form is, you must know this, Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act 2003. Okay. Now, what is FRBM Act? How is it useful? Why was it enacted? To understand this, you need to understand one fundamental concept in economics, and that is called fiscal policy. So we'll analyze fiscal policy in detail. Okay. So what is fiscal policy basically? Look, there are two types of policies. One is monetary policy. Monetary policy basically governs the supply of money. And monetary policy is handled by RBI. Okay, so RBI influences Indian economy through its monetary policy. Similarly, government influences the economy through its fiscal policy. If monetary policy is the domain of RBI, fiscal policy is the domain of the government. Central government, state government. Okay, now what is fiscal policy? You all know that government incurs some expenditure for welfare schemes, for constructing roads, bridges. Government does a lot of expenditure. But government also receives money through taxes and other sources. Now, the money that the government receives is called receipts. And the money that the government spends is called expenditure. And the government comes out with a document every year called the budget. Right? Through this budget, government changes its expenditure, increases it or decreases it. Government through its tax policies increases its receipts or decreases its receipts. Okay. And when government manages its expenditure or receipts, this is nothing but fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is basically government's statement of managing its expenditure and receipts. Whatever government does with its expenditure or receipts is nothing but fiscal policy. That is why budget is known as government's fiscal policy document. Make sense? Clear? Simple? Okay, so fiscal policy is nothing but government's management of its expenditure and receipts. Clear? Now understand two things. I'm trying to explain all of this through the very basic. Okay, understand this. Well, when expenditure is more than receipts, okay, when a government spends more than it receives, well, government runs a deficit. This is known as fiscal deficit. Okay, so when expenditure is more than receipts, fiscal deficit. But when receipts are more than expenditure, that is fiscal surplus. Now remember this. Governments of modern era rarely run fiscal surplus. All governments, almost all governments run fiscal deficit. India also normally runs fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit is the norm, is something that always happens. Clear? Expenditures are always more than government receipts. That is the norm. Clear? Now the question that must be coming to your mind is that if government is spending more than it is receiving, where is this extra money coming from? If you are earning 1 lakh rupees per month, but you are spending 1.5 lakhs every month, where is this extra 50,000 coming from? Well, the government borrows money. Okay? So government's expenditure are more than its receipts, and this extra cash comes from the debt that government runs. So every year, whenever there is a fiscal deficit, well, the government fulfills that deficit by borrowing more money. So more the fiscal deficit, more is government debt. Clear? Simple, right? Now one more term that you need to understand. Okay? As I've told you that government will always run a fiscal deficit. Okay? So whenever government comes out with a fiscal policy, and in that fiscal policy, government increases its fiscal deficit. How would government increase its fiscal deficit? By spending more and receiving less. Okay, government cuts down on taxes and increases welfare payments. By that, government's fiscal deficit is going to expand. This is known as fiscal expansion. Remember this term, fiscal expansion. But sometimes government reduces its fiscal deficit, okay, by charging higher taxes, so receipts increase, and cutting down on subsidies, so expenditure decreases, right? So when government reduces its fiscal deficit, this is known as fiscal consolidation. The reason why government undertakes fiscal consolidation is when the government has too much debt, too much borrowings, okay? When the government has too much debt, so much so that it is not sustainable, well, government tries to reduce its debt. How does the government do that? Well, by reducing fiscal deficit. That is known as fiscal consolidation. Okay, so you understand these terms now, okay? Fiscal expansion, fiscal consolidation, fiscal deficit, fiscal surplus. Simple? Okay, now let's move forward. Now, fiscal policy is something through which government manages its fiscal deficit, and by that, government manages its expenditure and receipts. But fiscal policy has certain goals. Whenever government sets its fiscal policy, there are certain goals that the government has in mind. Okay, so what are these three goals? What are these goals? There are three primary goals for fiscal policy. Let's understand these three goals one by one. It's very important, okay? Number one goal is provide public goods. Number two goal is redistribution of national income. And number three goal is macroeconomic stabilization, stabilizing the economy, which is also known as counter-cyclical fiscal policy. Now I'll get to each of these three goals, okay? But first, let me explain goal number two. Then I'll make you understand goal number one and goal number three. What is goal number two? What is redistribution of national income? You all know this, that government in its fiscal policy comes out with tax policy also. And generally, government has this policy of taxing the rich. And government gives subsidies or, well, welfare payments to the poor. Okay? So government is earning money from the rich and giving it to the poor. Right? Taxing the rich and giving money to the poor, acting like Robin Hood. Okay? But government takes money from the rich and gives it to the poor. Through this, government is redistributing national income. National income is being produced, the rich have more money, so government takes some of it and gives as welfare payments to the poor. This is known as redistribution of national income. So whenever government comes out with a budget, and budget is nothing but fiscal policy, well, this is a priority, redistribution of national income for India's development. Clear? All right. So this is goal number one. Now, or goal number two, redistribution of national income. Now let's come to, well, this, provide public goods. Now, to understand this goal, you need to know what public goods are. Okay, there are two types of goods in economics. Okay, in economics terminology, there are two types of goods: public goods, private goods. Now, private goods are goods that you and I buy from the market. This pen, this shirt, okay, everything that you buy from the market at a price are private goods. But there are certain goods that are available to you for free. You don't have to pay any price for it. Okay? The government provides those goods to you for free. Those are known as public goods. For example, roads, bridges, okay, street light. There are so many goods, public parks. Government also gives you services like law and order service through police, defense service through army. These are all goods and services that government provides you for free, right? These are public goods. For private goods, you pay. For public goods, you do not have to pay. But you have to understand the difference between the two a little bit deeper because an MCQ can be asked. So let's take a look at the difference between public and private goods. Okay, so if we talk about public goods, all public goods are non-rivalrous. What do you mean by non-rivalrous? Remember this term. One person's consumption does not diminish availability for others. If one person is consuming a lot of public parks, that doesn't mean that those public parks are not available for everyone. If one person is taking the service of police a lot, that doesn't reduce the amount of law and order service for other people, right? So public goods are non-rivalrous. Government will make sure that if one person is consuming a lot of this public good, it is adequately available for everyone. This is what a public good is. Whereas in case of private good, they are rivalrous. If there are 1,000 pens in the market and I buy 900 of them, there are only 100 left for you guys. So this is rivalrous. Next, non-excludable. Okay, cannot easily prevent non-payers from access. Non-excludable means that everyone can use these goods. No one is excluded from the use of these goods, like roads, public parks, street lights. Everyone can use them. No one is excluded. Whereas in case of private goods, they are excludable. Okay, for example, this pen. The one who can afford this pen is included. The one who cannot afford this pen is excluded. All private goods are bought at a price, and thus price acts as an exclusionary mechanism. Those who can pay will be included. Those who cannot pay, they are excluded from the consumption of that good. Clear? So these are the two principles that you need to remember: rivalrous and exclusion. Okay, they differentiate between public and private goods. Okay, so street lights, national defense, lighthouses are public goods. Food, clothing, cell phones, cars, private property, these are private goods. Public goods suffer from a problem called free rider problem. What is free rider problem? When something is available to you for free, you don't care for it. Okay, you use it and you don't care for it. For example, because public parks are available to us for free, well, nobody takes care of these public parks, right? Everyone dirties them, everyone does littering, throws away stuff. You understand? This is a free rider problem. That is generally not the case with private goods. But nonetheless, let's keep this free rider problem aside. Just understand the difference between public and private goods. Now, since public goods are not available in the market or are not provided through market at a price, someone has to provide them. Government provides them. And for providing these public goods, government has to spend some money. So government spends that money in its budget. Budget is nothing but fiscal policy. Simple. So goal number one of fiscal policy is to spend money to provide these public goods. Simple. And now let's come to goal number three, which is very important for you to understand the logic behind FRBM Act. Okay, this is very important. Macroeconomic stabilization. Now listen to me very carefully. Okay. You see, let's suppose there is a recession. Okay, there is a recession, complete recession. Whenever there is recession, demand for goods and services falls because it's a recession. People don't have money, right? Now, whenever there is a recession, people's incomes also fall. When people's incomes fall, what happens? Well, when people's incomes fall, well, they would be paying less income tax. Government's receipts would fall. Yes, when people's incomes fall or whenever there is less demand for any good, well, people won't buy goods. There would be less GST. Government's revenues are falling. Yes, demand is low. Now, government's job is to revive the economy. Now, how will the government revive the economy? What does the government do? Look, when government's revenues are falling because of recession, government's natural instinct is to increase tax so that it protects itself, right? Because government's revenues are falling in recession, so government increases tax. This is its natural instinct. If government really wants to save the economy, government has to go against its natural instinct. And what is that against? What is this path? Government should run counter to its natural instinct. Now, what is that path? Whenever there is recession, government should reduce its taxes. Okay? When government will reduce its taxes, people will have more money. When people will have more money, they will spend it on goods and services. When people will spend it on goods and services, companies would profit. When companies profit, economy is revived. So when government reduces taxes, this boosts the demand of people. People now have more money, they will spend it. Profits are going to be earned by these companies and economy will revive. Yes, so government reduces its taxes, and side by side, governments increase their expenditure. Okay, so whenever there is a recession, government will increase their expenditure. Reduce taxes, increase their expenditure. By increasing their expenditure, so government starts building roads and bridges. When government is building roads, bridges, everything, then what happens? Well, when government is building a road, demand for cement will increase, cement companies will profit. Government will hire laborers, give them money, people will have more money. Plus government will give more subsidies, people will have more money. So government increases its expenditure so that people have more money and demand increases, economy is back on track, right? But in doing this, increasing expenditure, reducing receipts, government's fiscal deficit increases. But government is deliberately increasing its fiscal deficit to revive the economy. So government is doing deliberate fiscal expansion. Yes, the downside of this fiscal expansion is that government will have more debt, but that is useful debt because it is reviving the economy. So government is going counter to its natural instinct to revive the economy, to do fiscal expansion, thereby stabilizing the economy. Okay, now let's assume that, well, the economy is booming. The economy is booming like anything. Everyone has a lot of money. Because everyone has a lot of money, people are spending that money. Because people are spending that much money, well, there is high demand. And whenever there is high demand, there is also inflation. At this time, government should reduce its debt. Government has a lot of debt, so government decides to reduce its debt and reduce inflation. So what does the government do? Government increases its taxes, reduces its expenditure, thereby going for fiscal consolidation. Through fiscal consolidation, because government knows that the economy is booming, so we don't have to worry about this. So this is the time to reduce your debt and reduce inflation. So reduce your receipts, give less money to people, increase your receipts, tax them more and reduce your expenditure, fiscal consolidation. So to stabilize the economy during booms or recession, government takes these steps, fiscal expansion and consolidation. This is known as counter-cyclical fiscal policy. Simple? I hope you understood this. Okay. Now let's talk about these things. Okay. So let's talk about fiscal expansion. Fiscal expansion should be only done during recession because fiscal expansion has its advantages and disadvantages. What are fiscal expansion's advantages? Okay. Whenever there is a recession, if you do fiscal expansion, decrease tax, increase expenditure, it boosts the economy. It revives economic growth. Okay. Plus, it crowds in private investment. What do you mean by crowds in private investment? Listen to me very carefully. These are the advantages. Okay. During recession, already there is very low demand. Let's suppose I am a owner of a company that produces these pens. Okay. Because the demand is so low that my pens are not getting sold. Okay. Now, at this time, I will close down my factory. Yes, makes sense? I will close down my factory. I won't open another factory. Already my existing factory is not being able to sell all the pens. Why would I open another factory to produce these pens? They would also go unsold. So my investment, private investment in opening a new factory would come down during recession because there is not enough demand for these pens, right? So during recession, private investment comes down because there is not enough demand, right? So by fiscal expansion, government boosts demand. People have more money, there is more demand. When there is more demand, what will happen? Now my pens are getting sold, so I will open another factory boost to private investment. This is known as crowding in private investment, bringing in private investment by giving them an incentive. Simple? Yes. So these are the advantages of fiscal expansion. But what are the disadvantages of fiscal expansion? If there is no recession, the economy is booming like anything. Okay? If there is no recession whatsoever, and then also you do fiscal expansion, then what happens? Already the demand is high. You're making it more high or you are making it higher. Okay? Already demand is very high, and by fiscal expansion, you are increasing it further. This would cause inflation. As you all know, when demand exceeds supply, inflation happens. So this is one disadvantage. Then, where does the money come from for fiscal expansion? It comes from debt. Government has to borrow money for fiscal expansion. Now, our banks have limited money. If all the money is borrowed by the government, then less money would be left for private people to borrow from. Therefore, private investors would be crowded out. Because all the resources that the banks had, most of that was borrowed by the government. Less money is left for private investors to borrow from, crowding out of private investment. So, if done right, during recession, crowding in happens. But if done wrong, if fiscal expansion is done at the wrong time, it causes crowding out of private investment, harming private businesses. Okay? And then the biggest challenge is, well, all this money for fiscal expansion comes from what? Debt. Right? If you take too much debt, too much money, then this debt will be unsustainable because you have to pay off this debt in the form of interest payments. If you'll take too much debt now, in future you'll have to pay it off through interest payments. Now, most of your budget is spent on paying interest. If in future most of your budget is spent on paying interest because you borrowed too much today, so your future interest payments increase, you have limited budget. Most of your money is going towards interest payments. Less of it is left for welfare of people. People would be angry, right? So, plus at one point of time, your debt would become so unsustainable that you'll have to borrow more money to pay off this interest. Issue of debt is sustainability. So what is the solution? Well, for long term, you should go for consolidation, fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation in long term and during normal times. But during emergencies, recession, emergencies, you can go for fiscal expansion. Normally, you should go for fiscal consolidation, but if there is a problem, economic problem, then go for expansion for a little bit of time and then come back to consolidation. This happened during COVID-19 pandemic. During COVID-19, because of lockdown, we were in a state of recession. So government did expansion. But once the lockdown was over, government came back on the path of consolidation. Make sense? Clear? Okay? All right. Now, there are a few terms that you should be aware of, which I'm assuming you're already aware of because you have covered economics. And if not, well, those of you who were enrolled in our Gurukul batch, you already know this. Okay? Those of you who have already covered with, are done with economics, you know these 4 deficits. If you don't know about these deficits still, well, go back and revise them. Okay? Key deficits, what is revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, and primary deficit. And in case there is a doubt, do ask me. But these deficits are important for FRBM. Clear? And now let's come to FRBM Act, the star of today's topic. Okay? FRBM Act. Now listen to me very carefully. Okay? I told you that during normal times, government goes for consolidation. But during emergencies, well, during recession, government is allowed to go for expansion. This is what counter-cyclical fiscal policy is. Right? But you know what? In democratic systems, well, rarely governments go for consolidation. Which government would want to increase taxes and lose votes? Which government would want to reduce welfare payments and lose votes? Governments who have to fight elections have this tendency of always being in the expansion mode. At least in the last year of their rule, okay, 5th year of their rule, they will always be in this expansion mode. They'll be giving freebies and all that. Expansion is the norm for democratically elected governments because they have to win elections. And that happened to India until 2003. Until 2003, fiscal consolidation rarely happened. And India was always on this expansion mode because the governments have to win elections. This led to unsurmountable debts on India. too much debt on India, so much so that in 1991 we had to go for IMF bailout. We had too much debt because governments were not listening. They were always going for expansion. Therefore, it was felt that, well, governments won't listen to normal common sense. We have to create a law, because once we create a law that you should do fiscal consolidation, then the governments are bound by law to do fiscal consolidation. So we have to create a law so the governments are compelled by law. And that is when FRBM Act was enacted. Under FRBM Act, the government has to do fiscal consolidation. Government has to reduce its fiscal deficit continuously. Yes, if there is a recession, they can deviate from their fiscal deficit target, reduction target. But normally they have to go for consolidation. And it was enshrined in the law. Now, this law has been amended many times. Okay. But we are going to talk about the latest amended version. Okay. Now, about FRBM, what were the objectives? Reduce fiscal deficit and revenue deficit to prudent levels, to sustainable levels. Reduce your fiscal deficit. This is objective number 1. Promote transparency and accountability in government financial operations. Government has to be accountable. Okay, government can't be in expansion mode, destroy the economy just so that they can win elections. They have to be accountable. Achieve intergenerational equity in fiscal management. You have to understand this term, intergenerational equity. What do you mean by intergenerational equity? Well, intergenerational means between generations, this generation, future generation. If you borrow too much money now because of fiscal expansion, you will have to pay off this debt in future. Okay. So in future, when you will pay off this debt, the government will be spending a lot of its budget on paying off that debt. Less money would be left for future generations' welfare payments. Future generations' welfare payments. So you are borrowing too much money now at the expense of development of future generations. Okay, don't do this. This is what we mean by intergenerational equity. Take care of future generations as well. You understand? And ensure long-term macroeconomic stability. If you don't have unsustainable debt, you will be stable, macroeconomically stable. Clear? Now, under FRBM Act, government has to follow certain targets. Okay, what are those targets? Government's fiscal deficit should be reduced to 3% of GDP. Central government debt should be reduced to 40% of the GDP. Total debt on government. Okay. Then general government. What is general government? Central government and all the state governments combined. So central government debt should be less than 40% of GDP and the combined debt of center and states should be less than 60% of the GDP. And yes, FRBM Act says that, look, if there is a recession, then you can deviate from your fiscal deficit target by 0.5% of the GDP and go for fiscal expansion. Let's suppose you had set yourself a target of reaching 3.5% of GDP of fiscal deficit. But there is a recession. So you can violate this target, deviate from this target up to 4%. Spend money. Take your fiscal deficit to 4%. This is escape clause. Like I said, in emergencies only go for fiscal expansion. Okay? So these are some of the extra points. If you have any doubt, do ask this doubt also. Clear? By the way, it was also said that every year during the budget, government has to present 3 documents. FRBM Act said that government has to present these 3 documents along with the budget. Okay, what are these 3 documents? Medium-term fiscal policy statement, fiscal policy strategy statement. So in this first medium-term fiscal policy statement, government will give itself targets for the next 3 years. In the second document, government will explain how will we achieve these targets. And third document is nothing but, well, overall macroeconomic situation. What does the government think? Okay. Now, in medium-term fiscal policy statement, government gives itself targets with respect to fiscal deficit. So we will reduce fiscal deficit by this much. Revenue deficit, tax revenue and non-tax revenue as a percentage of GDP, and central government liabilities, debt as a percentage of GDP. All these targets are mentioned in this statement. So remember this part also. Clear? Make sense? All right. And yes, let's come back to the last topic, and that is important. CAG report on FRBM Act. Now, CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General, basically came out with a report on how the government is following FRBM Act. Okay, how the government is following FRBM Act. Are there some improvements? What are the shortcomings? So these are some brief points. Go through them in your notes. In your notes, I have given a detailed overview that with respect, what did the CAG say with respect to central government debt trends, interest payments to revenue receipts. All these things are mentioned in your notes, so go through that. Plus, there are some extra points also. For example, there is this thing called internal and extra budgetary resources. In your notes, go through this as well. So your notes have some extra information. Do read them and ask your doubts. Clear? And that would be all. With that, we conclude today's session. So today was a long session, but it was totally worth it. I hope I cleared everything, every doubt that you had. But still, if there are any doubts, do ask me those doubts. And please do not forget to revise the notes, ask your doubts, and give the test on time. All right? And on that note, I'll be signing off with the promise of seeing you again with another topic on economics. Thank you, everyone.